But Jason was persistent, and when he finally came to Colombia and met me in Cienega and said he was serious, that we started doing this together. I think that's when we met. It was exactly a year ago on the 80th anniversary of the Cienega massacre. There was a huge gathering of the workers who had a chance to tell their story. And a lot of the people we represent in these cases came, and we were able to interview them and get photos. And the lady in the film who you saw had one arm chopped off is one of my clients, and her daughter is insane now. They lost their father in this grenade that went off and took her arm off, and her daughter saw all this happen and her father blown up, and so now she's insane. So the mother has now become a really brave activist for this case, and it inspires me and keeps me working to know that these are the kind of people we represent. I want to put this in just a little bit of a context for you in terms of these cases and what they are and how we can do this, and then want to talk about why this campaign is absolutely crucial to winning these cases, and the kinds of things we can all do together to make that happen. The United States in 1789 had some good people working for it then, the founding fathers and all, and they had a problem, which was that they wanted to resume trade with Europe after the Revolutionary War, and they needed to be able to assure Europeans that if they had a legal dispute in the high seas or offshore of the United States, that the courts of the United States would take care of that issue, that it would have jurisdiction. The courts of the United States would have jurisdiction over foreign disputes. So they passed a law called the Alien Tort Claims Act, and it has exactly 16 words, and it essentially says the district courts of the United States shall have jurisdiction over claims brought by an alien for torts in violation of the law of nations. That's it. And that sat there for about 180 years, not used much. It was used a couple of times in the 1790s. And then a local group here, the Center for Constitutional Rights, dusted it off and brought a case against, yeah, they're good people. They brought a case against a Paraguayan colonel who had tortured and killed people in Paraguay, and one of the wives of his victims saw him walking down the street in Brooklyn. And he had been given asylum here by the United States, so he was probably a CIA guy. And they brought this case. It's now a famous case called Falardega. And in that case, the court looked at this statute, and if you can imagine, because we're a very insular society, the United States doesn't like to have the courts clogged up with things involving foreigners. And so when the court looked at this, it was almost astounding, because the elements were just so simple. Let's see, there was an alien, there was a tort, a murder or a torture committed in violation of the law of nations, which is international human rights law. So the court just reluctantly, but with really no other intellectually honest option, said, yeah, it looks like you have a case. And so they allowed that case to go forward. My organization at the time, the International Labor Rights Fund, brought, along with several other groups, including CCR and Earth Rights, the first case using that statute against a corporation. We sued Unocal, which is a California oil company, for building a pipeline in Burma using slave labor. They used the military regime there to round up villagers at gunpoint, and then they went out and built a pipeline. So the same thing happened, that we had a Reagan-appointed district judge who looked at this and had to agree that we should be able to sue, but he just couldn't get his mind around that and dismissed the case. We went up on appeal and won in the Ninth Circuit, and then eventually we resolved this case through a negotiation. But the statute is there, and it is an amazing power that we have to open our courts up here to victims of human rights violations, who by definition can't bring the case in their own forum. If they could, they wouldn't need our help. So I've kind of made now a subspecialty of working on these Colombia cases. The very first one was against Coca-Cola. It's a long story, it's still going on. I would like to acknowledge Ray Rogers back there, who runs the Stop Killer Coke campaign. And of course, Camilo Romero, who spoke earlier, has been working with me on these things for some time. But when we first started bringing these Colombia cases, the statute had the elements, but we were saying something that just was so astounding, so against the grain of what most people would like to believe, and that is that American companies would actually pay a terrorist organization to murder people in furtherance of their business interests. And we went to Congress, we went to courts, we went to the public, and no one really took it very seriously. It was just too difficult. It's unbelievable, because most people want to believe that even big corporations, that they're American, they share our values. That's what you hear. You go on the State Department website, they say American companies spread American values. Let's support them. Well, we got a huge break, and it was that the Chiquita company had a board of directors meeting every year, and apparently at some period, I don't know exactly when the first meeting occurred when this was discussed, but it was brought up at a board meeting that Chiquita had been paying the AUC a security fee every year. And they actually discussed it. Well, should we keep doing this, and is it good for business? And they repeatedly, for several years in a row, decided that they should. It was the most profitable enterprise Chiquita had, was their Colombia operation. So they kept paying. Then in 2001, as was mentioned in the film, the Bush administration, I mean, imagine this, the Bush administration declared the AUC a terrorist organization. That meant that they really had to earn that title, you know, that there was years of accumulated violence that caused the Bush administration to reach out and say that is a terrorist organization. So that was in September of 2001. In December of 2001, Chiquita had his board meeting again, and then it came up, oh, it's a terrorist organization, we can't keep doing this, but they decided to do it. And they did it again for another year. And then they had a board member who just couldn't live with this and went and reported the company to the Bush Justice Department and said, we're violating federal law because it is a felony to pay a terrorist organization. And can you imagine what would happen if you were giving money to Al-Qaeda every year? I mean, you'd be in jail so fast. But Chiquita reported this to the Justice Department, and they didn't know what to do with this because they knew the CIA was supporting the AUC, the Colombian military was supporting the AUC, so how could they really take a strong position? And they didn't. They dithered for a full year trying to figure out, well, what do we do with this? And it was Michael Chernoff, who was the head of the Justice Department at the time, who basically told Chiquita, we don't know what to tell you. And didn't say don't do it, didn't say stop, they just didn't do anything. So then another year goes by, and the board member comes back with a lawyer, and this time he's had it, and he says, no, we're committing a federal crime here. So Chiquita was charged then by the Justice Department because they had no option with the felony of paying a terrorist organization. That seemed like a remarkable step for the Bush Justice Department. It seems pretty routine to me. They charged somebody who admitted committing a crime. But they still couldn't really get justice against Chiquita. That would have been inconsistent with certain values that administration had. So they let Chiquita then plead guilty. They negotiated a plea agreement. Eric Holder was their lawyer, and he got them a really good deal. They were fined $25 million. They were allowed to pay it over 5 years without interest. And the 12 members of the board who repeatedly voted across time to authorize payments to a terrorist organization that murdered at least 7,000 people, they were allowed to plead anonymously and walk. Not one of them faced any penalty whatsoever. So that's still the case. Nothing has been done, nothing will be done. So as soon as that plea agreement was reached and it was public, we were ready and we sued Chiquita in the civil courts under this law, and we also named the 12 board members, and we're going to pursue that case. The other case that we brought recently that is related is against Dole. Dole didn't plead guilty yet, but every time we interviewed anyone associated with this, whether it was a paramilitary person or a victim or somebody who worked in the area, truck drivers, everybody said it was all the same. Chiquita and Dole did exactly the same thing. So we sued Dole as well. And then now we're in the part of the case where we have to prove what we say. And that's hard. If you think about it, the only people who know what happened are the paramilitaries themselves and the company officials. They made some kind of agreement, how it was implemented, who paid whom what they did. They're the only people who know. Well, we got another beautiful gift in the process. That right when we started doing this, the Colombian government announced that they wanted to end their civil conflict, and they initiated a law called the Justice and Peace Law. And under this law, initially, any paramilitary who came in and confessed to his crimes would get amnesty. And so almost all of the big commanders came in, disarmed, turned themselves in, and they wanted amnesty. They wanted all their drug money, all the money they got from Chiquita and Dole and Drummond and Oxy and several other companies. They were thinking this was great, now we can be legal and take our money and live happily ever after. Well, the Colombian government got enormous heat for this sweet a deal for the paramilitaries. So while these guys were in custody, they changed the rules on them and said, no, we got to change it just a little bit here. If you come in and you confess to everything, the maximum penalty you can get is 8 years. And so since all of these guys are mass murderers, most of them would qualify for the maximum penalty of 8 years, and so they're in jail, and they are angry. They got sold out by the president of Colombia, who they all knew and thought they were working for, Uribe. They got sold out by their business partners, and so they're in jail, and as one of them told me, the others are having cocktail parties. So they started talking. They're talking on several levels, but if you work at it, they'll tell you a whole lot. And so we focused in on a guy named Carlos Tierras. He's in jail in Barranquilla, Colombia. He's been in jail about 3 years, and he's pretty sure he'll get the maximum penalty since he's confessed to at least 800 murders so far. And still going. I mean, they bring him out for a session and he talks and talks and talks. Well, I started talking to him, and it was very fortunate that one of I won't name him because he doesn't want this association, no, but one of the guys I worked with sort of had a friend of a friend who knew this guy and got me in to see him. And I met with him 5 or 6 times, and I was telling someone earlier that, you know, I really had to think about this. Well, here's a guy who's a mass murderer, and I wanted to help me. I mean, what can I offer him? Well, the only thing I could think of is a chance to tell his story in a way that did not make it appear to him, at least, that he was a mass murderer. So I began talking to him about the civil conflict and what he believed and why he joined it. And he eventually opened up to me. He said that he believed, people throw this in our face all the time, but he threw Vietnam in my face and said, it was just like your Vietnam War. If your guys had been prosecuted in Vietnam for the things they did in those villages, they would have been war criminals, right? And I said, I agree with you. I wasn't a big supporter of that war, but that's how he put his mind around what he was doing, that he was a commander of a unit that was in a civil conflict against the communist guerrillas who he thought were trying to take over his country, and he was doing his duty to the nation by participating.